shocking truth. These 7 morning habits could let you live past 90. And number 4 only takes 30 seconds. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for taking time, not just to watch, but to take care of the body that's carried you this far. The silence before dawn held its breath, as if the world was waiting. And in the small town of Fairview, tucked behind curtains of sleepy fog, something unusual stirred. It wasn't a storm or a siren. It was the sound of change, a quiet, unassuming rustle inside a worn-out house at the end of Oak Ridge Lane. For the first time in years, someone inside had woken up before the sun. The house belonged to Samuel Wright, age 72, a man whose life had slowed so gradually he hadn't noticed it slipping away. The kitchen clock blinked 5:31 a.m. The sky was still dim, painted with pale blue streaks that had not yet dared to become daylight. Samuel sat at the edge of his bed, hands resting on his knees, staring at a glass of water on the nightstand. It seemed so ordinary, and yet today it was the first domino in a line that would quietly shift everything. Samuel had spent most of the last decade in quiet isolation. Once a high school math teacher, a lover of long bike rides and backyard tomatoes, he had turned into a man of silence, routine, and aches. After his wife passed and his son moved across the country, the walls of his world began to shrink. But yesterday, something had cracked. A neighbor, 10 years younger, had suffered a stroke, and at the hospital, Samuel heard something that startled him more than the emergency itself. It's usually not a sudden event. The body whispers first, then it screams. That line had followed him home, haunted his dreams, and woke him before dawn. Now he sat in stillness, holding that thought, and for the first time in a long time asking, had his body been whispering too? He reached for the water. His fingers curled around the cool glass. He drank, not out of thirst, but decision. He had seen a video online weeks ago about how the first glass of water in the morning could change your life. He had rolled his eyes then, but now with nothing to lose and something to fear, he drank. The water was lukewarm, but it awakened something. His chest expanded and the stiffness in his back eased just slightly. He walked to the window, pulled back the curtain, and let the dawn spill in. It was the kind of morning he used to photograph with his old Nikon. He let the light soak his skin. He hadn't felt this alert before breakfast in years. Samuel shuffled into the living room and switched off the television that had become his roommate. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, letting the cold bite his bare ankles. The sun had not yet risen, but he could hear it. Birds beginning to chatter. The world was waking up, and so was he. A gentle rhythm pulsed through his body. Nothing dramatic, just presence. He began to move slow stretches, cautious bends. He reached for his toes, barely grazing his knees. But it was something. He rotated his shoulders. He took a deep breath and held it for a count of 4, then 7, then exhaled for 8. He did it again. The cold air made his lungs sting, but it felt right, intentional. This was not the life he used to live, nor was it yet the life he wanted. But it was a beginning, a fragile, defiant act of return. As the morning broke fully open, Samuel sat on the porch step. He looked at the sky, now, a softer blue, and whispered, "I'm still here." The wind rustled the trees in reply, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between him and the world. A sense of agency, a quiet promise that no matter how many years had been lost to inertia. Today was different. Samuel didn't know where this would lead. He didn't yet have a plan, but he had made a choice, and sometimes that's more than enough. If you've ever felt like you were drifting, like your mornings held nothing but aches and autopilot, maybe today is your beginning too. Maybe the first glass of water, the first deep breath, the first step outside is where you start reclaiming your days. Samuel did, will you? The morning light broke gently through the curtains, but Martha barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the empty chair across the kitchen table. It used to be where Harold sat sipping coffee while pretending to read the paper, always humming the same Sinatra tune. But Harold had been gone for 3 years, and the silence he left behind filled the room like a fog. It was a Wednesday in late spring, the kind of day that once meant open windows, garden gloves, and fresh coffee. Now, the calendar on the wall was 2 weeks behind. The coffee machine hadn't been used in days, and the garden had become overgrown, like so many other parts of her life. Outside, a bird chirped as if trying to pull her attention toward the living world. But inside, Martha moved slowly, as if wading through memory. She was 73, a retired piano teacher, and the mother of 2 children, who now lived on opposite coasts. She used to be animated, sharp-witted, someone who brought energy into any room. But now, her reflection often surprised her. Shoulders, slouched eyes, dull lips too tired to smile for no reason. Her days had blurred together, defined only by simple survival and not by joy. The problem wasn't just sadness. It was the haunting realization that she had quietly started disappearing from her own life. Martha wasn't sick. She wasn't in pain, but she was dimming. Her morning routine had become mechanical. Rise, shuffle, eat, sit, wait. There was no movement, no laughter, no warmth that lasted past the first hour. She felt like a shadow of the person she once was, and worst of all, no one seemed to notice. That morning, however, something shifted. As she opened the pantry to grab her usual breakfast, plain toast and tea, she paused. Her fingers lingered on the bread bag. She thought of her neighbor Celia, who'd once said, "You've got to shock your body with kindness before it forgets how to respond." Martha hadn't thought much of it then, but now it echoed. Her body didn't hurt, but it didn't feel alive either. Was that the slow erosion people warned her about, where stillness becomes a habit, not a relief? For the first time in weeks, Martha hesitated. She looked down at the toast in her hand and then placed it back on the counter. It was a tiny rebellion. Instead of sitting down like usual, she stood by the window and pulled back the curtain. Sunlight streamed in, gentle but insistent. She blinked, then stepped outside barefoot onto the small wooden porch. It was cooler than expected, and the wood pressed against her soles, reminding her that she was still capable of feeling something. In that moment, something unexpected happened. She inhaled deeply, almost without thinking. The scent of blooming honeysuckle hit her nose. She closed her eyes and held the breath for a second longer than usual, then exhaled slowly, like she used to teach her piano students before a recital. In, hold, out. It wasn't a dramatic act, but it was intentional, and for her, it was enough to wake a part of her that had been asleep for too long. She stood there for 5 minutes. No phone, no coffee, no plan. Just Martha standing in the sun, breathing, noticing. The warmth on her face reminded her of summer mornings in her 20s when she'd rush outside with a journal in hand and dreams in her head. She wasn't that girl anymore, but maybe she didn't need to be. Maybe being Martha right now could still mean something. As she stepped back inside, she glanced at her reflection again, this time catching a trace of softness she hadn't seen in a while. Her eyes still looked tired, but less defeated. She filled a glass of water, drank it slowly, and whispered to herself, "I'm still here." The house didn't answer. The world didn't shift, but something inside her did. That evening, she moved the calendar forward. It was small, almost silly, but it was also her way of saying she was paying attention again, that she might not be ready for a full transformation. But she was done, fading without a fight. She stood by the porch one last time before bed, looking at the stars. A quiet question stirred in her chest. If I can change one thing tomorrow morning, what else could follow? And with that thought, she let herself hope again. It started with a knock, barely audible, but enough to break the morning silence that had blanketed Martha's home like a second skin. She was standing at the sink, rinsing out a mug she hadn't used in weeks, when the sound echoed again. Not urgent, not loud, but unfamiliar. She wiped her hands, heart picking up pace, not out of fear, but surprise. Visitors were rare, especially unannounced ones. Opening the door, she found a young woman, mid-20s maybe, with curly auburn hair and a clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. She wore a name badge that read GRACE, Community Wellness Outreach. Behind her, a silver van idled quietly at the curb, its side painted with colorful images of seniors gardening, walking, smiling, too bright. Martha thought instinctively, too cheerful for how the world really feels. "Good morning," the girl said, with a voice too soft to be annoying and too kind to ignore. "I'm Grace. We're checking in with local seniors to offer some free health and wellness resources, basic movement classes, daily check-ins, morning walks. Would you be interested in learning more?" Martha hesitated, her fingers tightening around the doorknob. Part of her wanted to say no, to wave this off as something for people who needed help. Not her, not yet. But another part, the part that stood on the porch yesterday, barefoot and breathing, felt curious. Or maybe just tired of being alone with her excuses. "I'm not really one for group things," Martha replied, her voice cautious, edged with the old pride she still carried. Grace nodded, not missing a beat. "Honestly, most people say that at first, but sometimes even just one conversation can change how you feel about the day ahead." Something about that line pierced through Martha's resistance. She didn't say yes, but she didn't close the door either. Instead, she invited Grace in for tea because it felt like the right thing to do, and watched the young woman's eyes light up at the offer. As they sat across the same kitchen table that had felt so empty just days ago, Martha listened. About the morning stretch group that met at the park once a week. About Harold. Yes, Grace knew of him. He'd once fixed the wiring in her aunt's old radio years ago. About the simple power of waking up with a sense of purpose, even if it only lasted 10 minutes. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the time Grace left, Martha found herself holding a pamphlet she hadn't intended to keep and saying, "Maybe I'll stop by, just to see." That night, she dreamt of Harold, not sick and fading, but young again, his sleeves rolled up, and his eyes laughing. He stood in their old garden, planting something in the earth. "You're not done," he said. "You're just in between seasons." When Martha woke, her pillow was damp, but her heart was clear. The dream wasn't dramatic. It was just enough. Over the next few days, she wrestled with the idea. Walking to the park, meeting strangers, moving her body in front of people. It all felt foreign, but also possible. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. On a breezy Monday morning, Martha stood at her closet, staring at a pair of old sneakers she hadn't worn since the winter before Harold got sick. She slipped them on slowly. They still fit. She brushed her hair, tied it back, and stood in front of the mirror. The woman staring back looked hesitant, but not invisible. And for now, that was enough. As she made her way down the street, the familiar ache in her knees whispered its usual warning. But she kept going, step by step, past the bakery, past the mailbox, until she reached the park. And there they were. Not many. 5 or 6 people her age, moving slowly, laughing too loudly, breathing deeply, and Grace waving when she saw Martha, as if she'd been expecting her all along. Martha didn't join the group right away. She sat on a nearby bench, watching, listening, feeling. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like an observer in someone else's world. She felt like maybe, a beginning. Her breath was still short, her legs still stiff, her voice still quiet. But her presence, that was returning. She looked up at the sky, blue and cloudless. A question drifted through her. What if it's not too late to begin again? And for once, she didn't push it away. The first time Martha joined the group, she stood 3 steps behind everyone else, not out of shyness, but caution. Her body, once strong and full of instinctive grace, now moved like it had forgotten its own rhythm. Grace noticed her hesitance, but didn't push. Instead, she simply walked over, offered her a folded towel to sit on, and said, "Start wherever you are. That's always the best place." The sun was still low in the sky, casting long golden lines across the dew-covered grass. The others were already beginning slow stretches, arms reaching toward the sky, like branches in bloom. Martha mirrored them quietly, a little behind, a little unsure, but there. It had been years since she'd heard her own breath like this, steady, warm, alive. But progress, as she would soon learn, doesn't arrive in straight lines. That night, the pain in her knees returned with a vengeance. It wasn't sharp. It was stubborn. A quiet reminder of every year She'd spent not moving enough, not asking for more from her body. She sat at the edge of her bed, massaging the ache with both hands, wondering if she had made a mistake. "I'm not who I used to be," she whispered to no one, not even sure who she meant by used to be. Was it the woman who danced barefoot in her kitchen? Or the one who once hiked mountains with Harold on summer weekends? She didn't sleep well that night, but the next morning she rose early anyway, and she returned. Grace welcomed her with a nod, not praise, as if to say, "I see you, and I expected this." Somehow that felt better than applause. Over the next few weeks, the mornings became something sacred. Not easy, never easy, but sacred. Martha learned how to stretch without fear, how to breathe when the discomfort crept in, how to laugh when her hip popped a little too loudly. The others shared stories between movements. One had just recovered from a fall. Another was learning to cook for one after losing her partner. And Martha quietly was learning how to exist again without fading. But healing is rarely quiet forever. It was during a light morning walk when it happened. Martha turned to wave at Grace just as her foot caught the uneven edge of a walking path. The stumble was small, but the fear that flooded her chest was enormous. She didn't fall, but she froze. Mid-step, breath locked in her throat. The others didn't notice, but Grace did. Later, seated back on her bench, Martha wiped her eyes quickly, pretending the morning breeze had irritated them. Grace sat beside her without a word, her presence calm and grounding. "I thought I was better than this," Martha finally said. Her voice cracked, worn by frustration and the sting of fear she hadn't felt since Harold's final days. I thought I was moving forward." Grace waited a moment before replying. "You are. But healing isn't a ladder. It's a spiral. Sometimes we revisit old fear, not because we failed, but because we're ready to face it from a higher place." Martha turned to look at her eyes, wide, absorbing every syllable. "You think I'm ready? I know you are," Grace answered gently. "Because this time you didn't turn away. You stayed." That night, Martha sat with her journal for the first time in nearly a decade. She didn't write about the stumble. She wrote about the breath she caught afterward, the way her heart kept beating, the fact that she had walked home anyway. She ended the entry with one sentence. "Fear came, and I stayed standing." As the days passed, Martha became more than a participant. She became a rhythm in the group. She learned names, told stories, even brought a thermos of tea to share one crisp morning. Her voice, once reserved for memories and whispers, now carried into conversations with ease. She wasn't just moving her body, she was moving through herself. And though Harold never returned in a dream again, his absence felt lighter now, as if perhaps his presence had simply moved into a different part of her, quieter but closer. What if the greatest transformation doesn't come from becoming someone new, but from remembering the strength that never left? If this story stirred something in you, maybe a moment of recognition, a whisper of hope, stay with us. Your journey matters, and it's never too late to begin again. The wind had changed. It wasn't stronger or colder, just different, softer somehow. As if the season itself had paused to acknowledge something unspoken, Martha stood at the edge of the garden path, watching a row of irises sway beside the bench where it all began. A year had passed since the morning she first showed up stiff and uncertain. Today, her spine stood taller. Her hands no longer trembled when she moved, and the ache in her heart had softened into something else. Something she hadn't known she could feel again. Peace. The community garden had become her second home. Its benches, its dirt paths, even its stubborn squirrels were familiar now. But what changed most wasn't the garden. It was her presence within it, where once she had lingered at the edge of every moment. Now she stepped directly into them. Her laughter came quicker. Her silences felt full, not hollow. And perhaps most beautifully of all others had noticed. Morning Martha, said David, the man who had just started coming to the group last week. His voice was nervous, his steps unsure, like hers used to be. She turned to greet him with the same soft nod Grace had once given her. Start wherever you are, she said warmly. That's always the best place. That was the moment she knew. She wasn't just healing, she was guiding. But the true turning point came unexpectedly, as they often do. A young woman had come to visit the garden with her aging mother, and seeing Martha's ease of movement, she approached with hesitation. My mom's been afraid to leave the house lately, she explained. She used to love being outside, but now everything seems harder. Martha didn't answer right away. She looked at the older woman. The way her hands trembled slightly, the way her eyes darted around, searching for something familiar. She remembered that look. It had once been her own. Instead of offering advice, Martha offered her hand. No pressure, no expectations, just the invitation to sit, to be, to breathe. And they did, together. The young woman teared up quietly later. As they left, she turned and said, You have no idea how much that meant. But Martha did, because she had once been the woman who needed a place to sit, who needed a reason to stay. And now, without even meaning to, she had become someone else's reason. That night, she walked home slower than usual, not from pain, but from reverence, from the awareness that her life had circled back to meaning in the most unexpected way. She poured herself a cup of tea, opened her journal, and wrote a new kind of entry. I thought, my story ended when Harold died. But I was wrong. That chapter closed, but the book wasn't finished. Today I gave someone hope, not by fixing her or preaching or promising answers, but just by being present. Maybe that's all healing ever really asks of us, to stay present, to keep showing up. She closed the journal and smiled. And here's the part that matters most. Martha's transformation didn't come from some miracle cure or massive breakthrough. It came from morning after morning of small decisions. Stand up, step outside, breathe, stretch, show up again. It came from listening to her body instead of punishing it, from letting grief have its voice, but not the final word. Maybe you've been carrying something heavy too, a loss, a regret, a stiffness that's crept into your bones or your heart. Maybe you've convinced yourself that it's too late, that your best moments are behind you. But what if they aren't? What if, like Martha, your body is still waiting for your trust, your presence, your kindness? What if the smallest action tomorrow morning, drinking that water, stepping outside, moving gently, could change everything over time. The journey back to yourself doesn't require perfection, only permission. Permission to begin to fail, to begin again, just like Martha did. And if this story touched something in you, don't let it pass as just a nice thought. Let it be a signal. Take one small step, today or tomorrow morning. Start wherever you are. That's always the best place.